Well, it's great to be here today, and as most would know, it's our special Sunday school day where we, well, not reward, but we celebrate our Sunday school, and that'll be a bit later on in our program. But I just wanted to bring greetings from last weekend. We had the rally up at Brisbane. No, we didn't. We had the rally at the Gold Coast, the Brisbane rally at the Gold Coast, if you wonder why. And there was probably 300 or 400 people there. And a great time of fellowship, and unlike some years, the air conditioning was working. It's good to see you here too, Alison. But we had a great time of fellowship, and there were many testimonies, and they're interviewing people, which seems to be a part of what we do these days, and it was really uplifting, great theme, and it's great to be able to gather together with the saints. And all those that were there said, okay, well, there you go. All right, now today we're going to talk about your families. And it's interesting, a lot of people would say there's not many scriptures in the Bible about family. And it's interesting too that they're right. With the specific family, we know we're the child of God. And I want to just talk about the way we present ourselves as parents. And this is from observation. This is also from scripture, of course. So I'm going to get you to go back to the book of Judges chapter 2 initially. And I want to just talk about a word, consequence. And this word consequence, it's derived from the Latin word sequa. And the word consequence actually means to follow. And one of the things that is more apparent in the world of now than ever is a lack of understanding of the consequence for behaviour. And I want you to just think about that, particularly the parents today. Even those that haven't got children yet. You haven't even got a wife. But one day you might be a parent. And I wanted to talk to you today about consequence-free zones. But to get us into the topic, I want to read you a little passage of scripture here, Judges chapter 2. It's believed this was written by Samuel. And these judges are supposedly impartial decision makers. Many of them came out of the military, and their job was to keep justice and to keep Israel in good stead, to keep the community together through doing good things and rightly administering God's justice. And an angel of the Lord came unto Gilgal to Bosham and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt and have brought you into the land which I swear unto your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land, ye shall throw down their altars. Now this is where I want you to remember these verses now. You have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I said also, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare unto you. And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. They could see that they had pushed the Lord's judgments and his commandments into the background. And they called the name of that place Bosham. And we can jump up to verse 9. And they buried him in the border. We'll jump to verse 10. And also that generation were gathered unto their fathers. And there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. And this is after the captivity, of course. This is after they came out of the land of Egypt. And here, within a generation, they had forgotten that God delivered, that God looked after, that God provided. And I guess the analogy I'd like to sort of draw on today as we're thinking about this is that here in Israel's time, there is a very strong reminder about generational change and the need for us to pass on God's commandments, his precepts and his understanding to our children. And here it goes on in verse 12, and they forsook the Lord God of their fathers. And verse 14, and the anger of the Lord was against Israel. Verse 20, because that this people has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice. I just want to pick up one more verse, that's nearly voice, in Judges 17. And it's just one verse there. In those days, there was no king in Israel. There was no correct judgment. There was no direction. But every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Now, I've skipped over that, and you can read through it thoroughly if you want to. But it is interesting that what we have here, I guess in a sense, it's like history repeating itself. As God and God's commandments and his statutes and his deliberations and his directions are pushed away from society, society starts to crumble. And what's happening now, like no other time in my life or your life, God is being pushed away from the family. And I want to read you a quote here, and then I'm going to tell you who said it. We have taken God out of our educational systems and thought we could get away with it. We have sown the wind, and we are now reaping the whirlwind. We have laughed at God, religion, and the Bible. That was said by Billy Graham. And the scary part of it, it was said in 1955. We're a long way down the track from back then. We're a long way down the track. Now, when we look at Bible prophecy, and you can pontificate about when the Lord's going to return and how he's going to return and when he's going to return and various bits and pieces like that, I absolutely believe that there is no greater indicator of the demise of our civilization than the demise of the family. And what I want to talk to you about today, it's not complicated. I just want a bit of a message out to the parents because it's a particular day, is that when we raise children, it is going to get harder and harder for you to have a say in things. And I think some of us are already experiencing this in the schools and all that sort of thing. So more and more, what goes on in your household is absolutely integral and vital to the spiritual existence of your children, of your offspring. And we love our children, and all the people said. But what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we don't allow the world to overrule God's precepts. I've called this talk today, Consequence-Free Zones. And I guess in a sense, I want you to think about that. There's much in that picture. And you can make what you want of it. You've got a guy there sitting on the mat. He's got his back to his wife. He's actually talking on the phone, and he's got his laptop. But they're out in the bush, which is a beautiful thing to do. His wife's there looking at a smartphone. The little fella's there trying to make what you want of it. But what I want you to make today, and what I want you to get out of this little talk, is that your household must be a household that understands consequence. There must be a calmness in your household that's built around the consequence of actions. Because what's happening in this world, and I guess in a sense, I've just about read out what the world is like today, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It's not going to keep working. It's the demise of the family. You know, I remember talking to Pastor Nelson a couple of years back, or it might have been last year, and he was whispering me all kinds of things when I was at his house. And is it true that certain people can marry others? And what about this? And what about that? And they teach this in schools. And when you say, yes, it's true, I don't even know what I'm whispering for, but anyway. But when he goes, you're joking. And one of the things that I've had the pleasure of in my travels, you know, I've been over to PNG probably 40 times. I've been over to Africa probably 16 times or something like that. I've had the benefit of rubbing shoulders with families that are still families, that are still looking out for each other, that are still able in their family community to have a standard. And that standard is being taken from us in this world that we live in. And so this is why it's so important that we are able to really dig into our topic today, Ephesians chapter 6. And this is the only verse that I'm going to read to you, because when you give talks about bringing up kids and children in the church, we always read 3 or 4 verses, you know, spoil the rod and spare the child and all these kinds of things. So I want to read you something here that's something that we've read before, but I'm going to read the verse that's critical to us today. I'm going to read it in the Amplified Bible. We're in Ephesians 6 verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honour thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. There's a massive assumption there that the parents are walking in the Spirit, but we're not going to talk about that today. That it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on earth. So this is sheep stations. This is big. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And all the fathers said, ooh, yes, okay, that's almost acceptable. Let me just read it to you in the Amplified, that Ephesians 6 verse 4. Fathers, do not irritate and provoke your children to anger. Do not exasperate them to resentment, but rear them tenderly in the training and discipline and the counsel and the admonition of the Lord. It's kind of like poking the bear. Who knows what poking the bear is? We're going to talk about it in a minute. I'm going to give you 6 pointers today. And these are outside Scripture, but they're not really. And that's what I want to talk to you about. The first thing that we need to do as parents is give our children time. Our time. Quality time. You might be a business executive, you might be aspiring to something, but if your child or children are just diary entries, you've got a problem already. I often say when we're talking about this with particularly the people up in Papua New Guinea, no one else on earth other than your wife can have matched DNA to your children. You are vital to the very fact that they exist. And your children need to know that you're there for them. Your children need to know that you will get off the phone straight away and not be married to your work. And I know we've got to make a living and all that kind of stuff. I have regrets. One of my regrets, I'll wear this, hope Amber's gone out of the room, is that for a lot of Caleb and Amber's time, I was always at the New Zealand rally when it was their birthday. And I regret that. Because every now and then it comes up when someone's not happy with me. Not Amber, she's all right. Give your children time. Give your children time. Your children need to know that you love them, of course, and tell them that you love them. But your children need to know that you're not giving answers all the time, that you're prepared to listen to how they feel. You know, I had a time in my life when Pastor Lloyd was, he was getting picked on, back in the days of Truth. Who remembers that era? Mate, you guys are old. And whilst he was getting picked on with Truth, I was getting beaten up at school because of it. And I didn't sort of like that idea very much, and it ended a little bit ugly, and I hurt somebody, and I'm confessing before all here, but what it is, give your children time. You're their DNA. No one else can. Listen and know them. Know who they are. They're not just sitting out of sight, out of mind. They are your flesh and blood. And see, this all gets down to this concept that'll grow when we're talking about this today. We are, through our love for our children and the time and the nurturing and all that sort of stuff, you are teaching them consequence as you're doing it. And one of the things that I've jotted down here, it is so easy to be a hypocrite when you're a parent. Am I biting enough for people today? It is. The old saying, don't do as I do, but do as I say. Parenting can be like that. I'm talking about your demeanour. And there's I don't even need to pick verses up on that, because we should have godly demeanour. And our godly demeanour should not just be when we're with each other. Our godly demeanour should be in the household. You don't lose your cool with your children. You keep it together. You show them through your actions that you're Spirit-filled. When some people say, there's not many verses on this. Yes, there is. The whole New Testament is about our behaviour. And so it's so important to give your children time. Give your children ideals for living. Teach them that moral and spiritual principles of life. Teach them what they are. Being right, good, nice to people, and kindly, all that sort of thing. Show them that via a good moral and spiritual attainment, one really does attain satisfaction. We should be teaching our kids to be good citizens. We should teach our kids to care for others, and I'm going to mention that a bit later on. So that's the second point, ideals for living. Give your children a good example, and I jump to this quickly. Watch what you say, how you say it, how you deal with life, how you deal with things when the chips are down. Do you do your nana? Do you have a short fuse? Your children see all that. And then you wonder later on when they do the dummy spit and throw the cat out the window, where they got it from. What are you like as a parent? Your demeanour, the calmness that you present. And here within that framework, when you are given to godliness and sincerity and love, there's no hypocrisy in what you're saying. Give your children fun activities. Plan things together as a family. Make home interesting and make it so your children want to be there. It's interesting, sometimes, parents get fed up. They're out at the office and come home and that, and the kids just come home and they go straight up to their bedrooms and spend, one of the things that people think, and I'm going to say it, is that when you're giving your children time, that handing them the iPad is what that means. Disaster. Some of those things like iPads and smartphones, particularly when you're little kids, you're opting out. You're not allowing your children to converse. You're not allowing there to be an interchange. So a little bit later on, when things get tough and they become teenagers, if you haven't established a relationship with them where there's discussion and some sort of two-way interchange, and all they've been doing is living with their snouts in the iPad, then they're not going to know you. They're not going to come to you. Who will be their parent? Dr. Google. That's the way it's working. That's the way it is today. Know your children. Spend time with them. Teach them ideals for living. Be a good example. Set up fun activities. Make your home a place where they want to be. And here we get down to the hard stuff. Give your children discipline. And this is what this is really about. This do as you please mindset, if it feels good, as I've read there out of Judges, that's what will destroy your children. We need to teach children. We need to teach them well. Hey, that's a song, isn't it? Teach your children well. And yeah, it doesn't matter. But we need to teach children, like with that Latin word, that every action has a consequence. And consequences can be good and consequences can be bad. And one of the things that happens, some people that I would call holy joes, who knows that terminology in the church? Yeah, you are one, do you, Anne? No, you're okay. But holy Joe type people, you know what I'm talking about, people that have got a verse for everything, they're scary parents, I tell you. Sometimes parents like that are just dishing the verses out. They're not giving any compassion. They're not explaining. One of the things that Pastor Lloyd used today, and yeah, he had his moments, and I wasn't the best, and there's others in the family and all that sort of stuff. I know of a story, and I'll tell you the other part of it. A person came into this church, and the young man had a fabulous DVD collection, or CD collection, of all kinds of stuff, just whether it's contemporary music or whatever. So the father, in his infinite wisdom, to win brownie points with his son, who was at his formative age, he's about 18 or whatever, just to win friends and influence people, did a raid on his room, grabbed the CDs and put them in the fireplace and melted them down. So who thinks that's a good idea? No one's even putting their hand up, you know. I think that's appalling. You know what Pastor Lloyd used to do with me? I know he wasn't the best dad. Sorry, Mum. He used to come and sit on the bed, and I used to play him Stairway to Heaven. Yeah, and then I used to put the heavy stuff on. But he was never one who would just go to prohibition mode unless there is a consequence for action. And I'm not saying he was the best dad on earth, but sometimes people, they're so determined to get it right that what they do is they've got this mindset as parents that they've got to win every argument. And I believe that as you're growing up with your children and you're learning, because you haven't been a parent before, most of us, is that when it gets to a certain time, you've got to learn which arguments matter. And the other thing too is when kids are younger and all that kind of stuff, the worst thing you can do is make some sort of ridiculous statement. Like, if you say that again, I am going to beat you within an inch of your life, and I'm going to take your head off. What are you laughing for? There's a lot of people feeling very guilty about this. I can see that. But don't make statements that are crazy. The whole idea in parenting is you need to be an example. Not an example of hypocrisy, but an example of calm. An example of understanding. Explain things. And explaining things doesn't mean that you sit down with your 11-year-old and open up to the book of Revelation, chapter 14. It means that you sit down and spend a large majority of your time talking about wholesome virtue and godliness. Not all the time. You know what you've got. They need to know that you're happy with what you got. That's simple. Sometimes we get the cart before the horse. Give your children discipline. Do as you please will destroy children. They need consistency. To learn consequences, there's no free rides. Pick the fights worth winning. And the final one here, give your children the incentive through your demeanor to want to know God. Think about that. Give your children the incentive to want to know God because they see God in you. And I know it sounds a bit out there. You know, one of the things that I've seen in my time in the church is that sometimes parents, they set up a falsehood. So your kids grow up in the church, and we're careful with this in our testimonies. Your kids grow up in the church, and they've been taught by their parents that everything that you pray for will happen. And so then when they become teenagers and they get to a stage where they're starting to work it out for themselves, they realize that it doesn't work like that and they feel ripped off. The other thing too is that happens with young people as they grow up in the church. From this platform, we're constantly talking about vision. We're constantly talking about a revelation of the Holy Spirit. We're talking about, like we talked about last Brisbane, the refraction of light and what it does to us and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes when you're coming up and you're 12 and 13, 14, 15, you're hearing all this sort of stuff. And in your mind's eye, you're thinking, well, where's my vision? I haven't seen Jesus walking and made my bed or anything, or walked into the room or down the corridor or whatever. And so sometimes as parents, we need to explain the terminology. And the only way you can explain the terminology to your kids as they grow up in the church is to have that relationship where they ask. Because people can grow up in the church and they come to this age where they're trying to work it out and they say, well, I haven't had a revelation. And that basically means they haven't seen God walk or Jesus walk through the wall or whatever. And so there can be misconstrued ideas. And it can be very confusing. Give your children the incentive to know God. And one of the things that we can do, and that's when you're dividing, in a sense, the difference between prayers for need and prayer for wants, which is, we've talked about that many times in the church. And one of the best things you can do when the kids are little, if you have a little prayer before you go to bed or whatever, before they go to bed, pray for others. Think about that. It is a scriptural principle. Jesus told us to do that. Pray for others. Get your kids to understand the power of prayer, but also the power of giving. Because all of this, give time, give ideals for living, give a good example, give fun activities, give discipline, give your children the incentive to know God. We need to teach children to be realistic about how God works. James chapter 3. I sort of wrestled with what verse I would use now, but then I thought it doesn't really matter in a sense, because this is about our demeanour as spirit-filled people. So we're in James 3 verse 8. Now I want you to apply this in your mind's eye. Let's apply this to the spirit-filled household. But the tongue can no man tame. It is unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. And that's just a general reminder to spirit-filled people that you can't say one thing and do another. We have to reflect Christ, not just through words. We have to reflect Christ through action. And that is not just in our demeanour generally, that is in our parenting of the young ones. Does a fountain send forth at the same time place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? Either a vine, fig, so can no fountain both yield salt and water fresh. Who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you are have bitter envying, I've got so many things written on the page I can't even read it, and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. And where envying and strife there is confusion, every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above, and this is our lesson, because this is the lesson that we emit. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that makes peace. You know, sometimes men like to say that they're the head of the house, and that's a scriptural principle. But sometimes they think that they're the sore head of the house, the bear with the sore head. And I say to the parents here, particularly the males, your job is to create a climate that is peaceable in your house. It's not just to come in at the end of the day, where's my dinner, woman? And put your feet up on the table and demand this, that, and the other, because your kids are watching. Your kids see everything. Your job is to show meekness, but also not to just let things go. Your job is to show people that there's no hypocrisy, that you are meek and mild, and that the fruit of the Spirit is oozing out of all your joints. It's so important. The other thing too that's so important is that a husband and a wife need to have a common understanding. They don't do arguing. When you're going to have a little bit of a bingle, go in the back room. You know, you might even want to have a padded room in the house so you can sort yourselves out. Who knows? But don't have a Barney in front of the children. They're impressionable. They're impressionable, and it does matter a lot. Parenting must be without hypocrisy and absolute godly intent. Peace comes with our attention to God, and God is in your family. I just want to finish, and I want you to think about this, because I mentioned there aren't that many scriptures that specifically talk about bringing up children, but there are many scriptures that specifically talk about our demeanour. And sometimes we think that our demeanour is just who we are with our business friends and what we are Monday to Friday, whatever. But your demeanour, the most important time your demeanour is on show is at home. And all the people said. Philippians 4 says, whatsoever things are honest, just, good report, virtuous, praiseworthy, think on these things. This is what will sustain your family. Don't be a closed shop. Don't be hypocritical. Be there for your kids. Love your kids, because the whole principle of loving family and loving your children, that's how God sees us. And he wants to give us everything. And all the people said, let's bow in prayer.